Next on Currents News, moments of silence and tolling bells. 18 years later, Americans continue rituals of mourning, remembering the lives lost on September 11th.
It was the fastest cancer I've ever seen, and Thomas is one of many.
The story of Tommy Phelan, a hero who paid a high price for his selflessness, while most of the world remained oblivious to his suffering. It's the same story of thousands of people picking up the pieces of 9/11. And the exclusive story of Catholics from Brooklyn and Queens who rushed to the U.S. border when another diocese was in need. Plus, a Dorian survivor is thanking God and an American angel she lived through the storm. The news starts right now.
James M. Amato.
David Michael Barkway.
The reading of nearly 3,000 names. The solemn script, a ritual for the last 18 years. Good evening, I'm Tamara Lane. But this year, something is different on that holy ground. A half dozen stacks of stone now salute an untold and ever-growing number of people who aren't on the list of names. The new memorial at Ground Zero honors another segment of the 9/11 community, those who breathed in the dust. National correspondent for the Tablet and Crux, Christopher White, has their story.
Father Brian Jordan remembers the days after September 11, 2001, where in the midst of debris and devastation, a rescue worker at Ground Zero discovered steel beams in the shape of a cross. For the many firefighters, police officers, and family members of victims asking, where was God after 9/11? Father Jordan would point them to that cross.
God is in that cross. This is a sign of hope.
Today, that cross is known the world over and has found a permanent home at the 9/11 Memorial and Museum. And now, 18 years later, survivors and victims' family members have another physical sign of hope, a sign that those who died from 9/11 related illnesses in the years following the terrorist attacks will not be forgotten. Earlier this year, the 9/11 Memorial and Museum opened the Memorial Glade. It's a new site designed to pay tribute to those who continue to suffer and to the memory of those who have died since the attacks. Nearly 3,000 people were killed during the September 11th attacks on the World Trade Center in 2001, but by 2024, it's estimated that more individuals will have died from exposures to toxins and other hazardous materials during the resulting recovery efforts than from the attack itself. The Memorial Glade opened in May and is made of stones that weigh between 13 and 18 tons each. It's become a place of solace for families who still suffer from the attacks, many of whom are not often thought of as September 11th victims, since they died in the years following 9/11.
We have to remember them because they served and they're giving the ultimate sacrifice for our country as well.
Father Jordan isn't the only clergy member who's grateful for the new memorial. Rabbi Joseph Potasnik has served as chaplain to the FDNY since 1999, and he says that the Glade is a sign of continued hope and perseverance in the face of tragedy.
We were all there together. I stood with a Monsignor, with a Reverend, with an Imam. All the people who participated, different faiths became one family.
On this 18th anniversary, Amy Weinstein, Director of Collections and Senior Oral Historian of the 9/11 Memorial and Museum, says that understanding the role these religious leaders played as first responders remains an essential part of that story.
It's not something that always rises to the surface, but there were pastors, ministers of pretty much every faith down here from the beginning and throughout the 9 months of the rescue and the recovery.
And for these religious leaders, the Memorial Glade is both a fitting way to remember the past and to look to the future.
Remembrance is something that all of our faith traditions stress. Remembrance is an integral part of our faith, but it's not enough to remember.
Christopher White, Currents News.
The new monuments make it clear that the deadly and lasting legacy of 9/11 gets worse each and every day. For months on end, emergency workers dug through the pile that had been the Twin Towers, desperately trying to locate the remains of the dead. The air they were breathing was filled with killer toxins. More cops and firefighters have died since 9/11 with related illnesses than were killed on that day. Now experts are reporting that nearly 10,000 people, first responders and civilians alike, have been diagnosed with cancers that are linked to what happened on that terrible day. Tommy Phelan was one of the civilians who lost his life years after the terror attacks. He was a brave man, a ferry captain who rescued hundreds of people on his ship from the chaos at Ground Zero. His brother Chris is a cop who himself spent months sifting through the rubble at the pile. Tim Harfman reports that as Chris remembers his heroic kin, he also worries about his own future.
18 years later, September 11th is an emotional day for NYPD Lieutenant Chris Phelan.
It's a very solemn day, and it's a day of remembering, and everybody says we'll never forget.
Attending a ceremony at Manhattan's 24th precinct, he's remembering those who lost their lives on 9/11, but particularly thinking about those who have died from related illnesses, like his older brother Thomas. The 45-year-old lost his battle with lung cancer last year, caused by breathing in the dark cloud of debris. On 9/11, Thomas was a captain for the Circle Line, steering ferries. When the nation came under attack, he sailed toward Lower Manhattan.
He assisted with the FDNY and bringing personnel over to Ground Zero, and then helping with the evacuation.
He transported hundreds to safety as part of one of the largest evacuation efforts on record. 2 years later, the ferry captain became a firefighter, serving nearly a decade before becoming a pilot in the Marine Division. But in January 2018, Thomas fell ill. What he thought was just a cough turned out to be cancer.
It was unbelievable when somebody that healthy would get cancer. We automatically thought he's going to beat this.
Thomas was a devout Catholic and attended Mass at St. Michael's Church in Sunset Park, Brooklyn, where his funeral was held. Through his suffering, he had faith.
I think it did help him. I think it did keep him strong. I'm sure he had, times of doubt or, worry, but I think he handled it better than, definitely better than all of us.
But just as Tommy had faith, now Chris has faith. As a rookie police officer, Chris worked on the pile in the months following 9/11. Now he's worried about his health and goes to the doctor every 6 months.
It's definitely something that's in the back of my mind every day. If my brother didn't pass away, maybe it would be less.
But he continues to serve in the NYPD, knowing Thomas is watching over him.
I do have faith that I'll see him again, and he's definitely, I definitely know he's in heaven.
On the Upper West Side, Tim Harfman, Currents News.
Another solemn tribute to the fallen was held this morning in the Diocese of Brooklyn. New York City's bravest and families joining with firefighters from across the nation in a march from Ground Zero that traveled over the Brooklyn Bridge. Along the way, the group passed several firehouses, headed to Mass at the Co-Cathedral of St. Joseph in Prospect Heights. The procession included an FDNY ceremonial flag for each of the 343 firefighters killed on 9/11 and an American flag in remembrance of all the others who died that day. President Trump at the Pentagon this morning, remembering those who died when a hijacked plane smashed into America's military headquarters. The commander-in-chief spoke of faith in the Almighty God.
We are now and will forever be one American family, united by patriotism, bound by destiny, and sustained by the faith of Almighty God.
The President and First Lady Melania placed a wreath at the entrance to the Pentagon in loving memory. 125 in the building and 59 passengers and crew on the airliner were killed. In Shanksville, Pennsylvania, Vice President Mike Pence paid tribute to the passengers of United Airlines Flight 93. On the day of the attack, civilians on board already knew what happened at the World Trade Center and the Pentagon. When a gang of terrorists took over their plane, the passengers fought back, causing the aircraft to crash. All 40 passengers and crew were killed. Many today are also remembering the so-called forgotten victims of the September 11th attacks. Those suffering from rare 9/11 illnesses are not confined to first responders or even to the New York area. People across the United States are suffering. That includes 300,000 office workers who worked in and around the iconic buildings. Kate Barragana worked 2 blocks away from the World Trade Center at the time that the towers fell. She currently is living in Mississippi battling 3 rare cancers that have been linked to the toxins. She spoke with Currents News' Emily Drewby about how one standard medical procedure changed her life forever.
I had a total knee replacement in October of 2018. And in the context of getting the medical clearance for the knee replacement, I had to have a mammogram, and the mammogram showed a breast cancer that had occurred in the year since my last mammogram. When I had the surgery for that breast cancer, they discovered a second breast cancer. And then shortly after that, there was a lump in my left thigh above where I'd had the knee replacement that was later diagnosed as soft tissue sarcoma that began to grow rather aggressively. So I was a perfectly healthy person, but because I had had another medical procedure in the context of preparing for that, one test led to another, led to another, led to another. And in the course of about 5 weeks, I was diagnosed with the 3 different rare cancers.
Wow. Now, doctors in your state of Mississippi didn't initially make the 9/11 connection to your cancers. They were tipped off by your cell phone number. What went through your mind when they told you these illnesses were related to that day?
Disbelief. It's been 18 years. I'd watched congressional hearings because of the Victims' Compensation Fund. I have a lot of empathy for the first responders, and I had always considered myself very blessed, very fortunate that I had not been directly impacted. So when I was told that these health consequences that I was having were related, there was 2 things. There was a sense of disbelief, and there was almost a sense of, it can't be true. How could that be? I don't look like the dear souls that are dying and in such, a difficult situation. But lo and behold, fact is, I do have these cancers and I do have to treat them, and they are going to impact me for the rest of my life. I was told that these aren't cancers that in 5 years you get to say I'm cancer free. They can come back or have additional ones in 7 years, 10 years. So a combination of disbelief and at the same time concern.
Now, Kate, I know it took your doctors a little while to realize that your cancer was connected to 9/11. Should more doctors around the country be educated about the effects of 9/11?
I think they should, because in my own process of trying to register for the World Trade Center health program, I had to get in touch with former colleagues to get what they call a statement that proved that I was in the area. And it doesn't necessarily go by your work records or your tax records. You have to have people who say they actually saw you, set eyes on you in the impact zone. And I found out during that time that 4 of my former colleagues that had also left my employment, same employer I had moved to different parts of the country and the world and had passed away of unusual and aggressive cancers. And then I found out that I was one of 4 others in other parts of the country, none of us in Manhattan, who were currently being treated for these unusual cancers. I don't know how you get the word out to so many doctors, but it does seem like if a patient presents with 1 in a million cancer, a 4 in a million cancer, or some other cancer that's on the very extensive list that the World Trade Center health program covers, that some flag should go off.
What has kept you going through all these challenges? I mean, this sounds incredibly difficult.
I'm a person of strong faith, first and foremost. I have a firm belief that God is with me, and He didn't kick me to the curb to leave me here. He's going to take me the rest of the way.
What message would you send to people who were near the 9/11 site?
I would say, get yourself certified with the World Trade Center health program and make sure your physicians know so that you can be in a very rigorous program of vigilant observation and protection.
Kate Barragona, who's living with 9/11's legacy, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you. Thank you for getting the word out.
It is estimated that over 400,000 people were exposed to the dangerous toxins released into the air after the towers fell. The White House is toughening up the fight against global terrorism. The president signing a new executive order that Secretary of State Mike Pompeo says has a key goal in mind.
It will help us to ensure that the deadly attacks of September 11th that occurred 18 years ago this week are never repeated on American soil. Never.
Under the new order, terrorists can be hit with sanctions without having to tie them to a specific act of terror. At the same time, more than 24 new groups are being labeled terrorists. There's a lot more news headed your way, including a story about the Diocese of Brooklyn coming to the rescue. A team of volunteers rushed down to Arizona to assist migrant families. Hear how they got a welcoming center off the ground and running. It's an addiction that may be nipped in the bud. The White House is weighing a ban on flavored e-cigarettes. Plus, she and her son with autism escaped rising floodwaters in the Bahamas. They had nowhere to go until they met an American stranger who offered a helping hand. The Trump administration's crackdown on immigration is leading to a sharp drop in arrest of migrants. During August, the number of people taken into custody was down by more than half from the month before. Still, Border Protection agents are being inundated. Currents News' Emily Drewby now reports on a team of volunteers from Catholic Charities of Brooklyn and Queens who went to the southern border crossing hoping to make a difference.
The U.S. southern border with Mexico is in crisis. Immigrants are trying to sneak into the country illegally, while Central American migrants are hoping to find refuge in America through asylum. There are so many people flooding the gates. Some are being released while their cases are processed. Left on their own, these families are getting help from Catholic Charities. This summer, a team from the Brooklyn Diocese went to Arizona to assist in setting up a new facility called Casa Alitas that would make a difference for the migrants.
They were not offered hygiene products. They were not offered showers. They would take their shoelaces off. These are not criminals, but they were being treated like criminals.
Richard Slizeski and Belkis Checo made the trip from New York to work alongside other volunteers at the border.
And they were coming here basically to escape.
Yes.
They're now back home to describe what they heard from asylum seekers who endured dangerous journeys.
In the night, they had to do firebombs to be able to keep the coyotes and the snakes away from them.
The Casa Alita Center is a place of solace after those difficult trips. Artwork filled the walls and toys filled the floor. Families given everything they needed, from a hot meal to a change of clothes to car seats.
It was beautiful being able to just come, I'll give it to you. Here, this is what else you need.
As Monsignor Alfred Lapinto of Catholic Charities Brooklyn and Queens explains, the caring Catholics are giving asylum seekers the things they need to feel welcome and at home.
It's an experience of real welcome, okay? Showing them that opportunity is going to be here for them because there's a caring community that's willing to adopt and embrace them.
Following the teachings of Christ to always welcome the stranger. In downtown Brooklyn, Emily Drewby, Currents News.
U.S. health officials have been urging people to avoid e-cigarettes, and now the president is too. The White House announcing today that it may ban the sale of most flavored e-cigarettes in an attempt to curb teen vaping. Details right now are sparse, but officials are saying the proposal may include a ban on menthol and mint-flavored products. Research has shown that these flavors are very appealing to both youths and non-smokers. Still to come on Currents News, a sneak peek at this week's tablet newspaper. There's an article about 9/11 hero that cannot be missed. And the special reunion for a little boy who rode out Hurricane Dorian after his family was trapped in the Bahamas. The tablet is putting together another edition filled with must-read stories that can't be found anywhere else. Two of the major highlights are articles about a Catholic chaplain's memories of 9/11 and the significance of Pope Francis in Africa. Editor-in-Chief Jorge Dominguez is here to tell us all about it. Jorge, thank you for being with us.
Oh, thank you for inviting me.
Let's start with Brooklyn's Monsignor John Delendick. He's a fire department chaplain who rushed to Ground Zero on 9/11. He told you about his experience. What did he say?
Well, we think that we heard everything reading about 9/11, and you see that each person has a special story. In this case, Monsignor, he was there the whole day, and he tells such moving story about, you know, giving absolution to a police officer who was fearing for his life and asking for the absolution, seeing people dying. And the other thing is the after effects of 9/11. He talks about celebrating so many funeral masses. I mean, it's a very touching personal story from a unique perspective. You know, as priest at 9/11, you have to read it.
Now, there's also special coverage of the groundbreaking trip that Pope Francis took to Africa. The tablet's reporting on the major significance of this pilgrimage of peace. What can readers expect to find?
Well, you said it very well, groundbreaking trip. And it is interesting, he went to 3 very poor countries in Africa. The press didn't cover the trip so much. We cover here in Net TV, Inés San Martin, our colleague from Crux, was covering the trip, was in the pop-up plane, was every step of the way with the Pope. But why it is groundbreaking? Because, they call Africa now the future of the church. And we saw in this trip a totally different phenomenon that we have seen in Ireland or in Chile. We saw, the 1 million people in the Mass for the Pope. And she is explaining, Inés is explaining in this article that she wrote especially for the tablet, why the trip was so successful and what does it mean for the future of the church. You have to read that article.
A great exclusive for the tablet. Jorge Dominguez, editor-in-chief of the tablet, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you, Tamara.
The tablet needs your support to ensure that Catholic journalism will thrive well into the future. You can do so by subscribing to the tablet so that it comes right to your mailbox. You'll save up to 55% by having it delivered to your home versus paying for it at church. Go to the website thetablet.org/home55 or call 877-883-8356. New reports out tonight from the Bahamas. The government speculate that 2,500 people are missing in the wake of Hurricane Dorian. But with every story of heartbreak, there's another of survival. The survivor, Sandra Sweeting, escaped the rising floods with her 12-year-old son who has autism. She credits her escape to her angel, an American tourist who stepped in when she couldn't afford a flight out.
He came to me and he put the money in my hand and he said, "This is the money for you and your son to get off the island." Me and my boys are safe and we're out of there, and I thank God for that.
Sandra and her son are now safe in Nassau. As for her angel, he sent her an email saying he's safe in Florida. Meantime, a touching reunion for a little American boy who was stuck in the Bahamas. Mackay Simons had his first day back at school Monday after missing class for a week. The 3-year-old and his mom live in Florida and were visiting family in the Bahamas during Labor Day weekend when they were forced to stay and ride out the storm. Last Friday, they were finally able to get on a cruise ship back to the U.S. The Bishop of Brooklyn, Nicholas DiMarzio, is asking for donations for victims of Hurricane Dorian. He is requesting that every parish in the diocese take up a voluntary collection this weekend, September 14th, or next weekend, September 21st. All donations collected will be sent to the Archdiocese of Nassau. If you'd like to make a donation directly to the diocese, you can make checks payable to the Compostela Fund and write Bahamas in the memo section. The mailing address for those checks is Compostela Fund, 310 Prospect Park West in Brooklyn, zip code 11215. The address is also listed on thetablet.org. That is Currents News. I'm Tamara Lane. Thank you for joining us because we are putting your faith in the news. Hope to see you again next time.